This is Sam Prue from Who Would Win Masters. We've opened new official channels and we want you there. Follow Who Would Win Masters on Instagram and subscribe to youtube.com/@WhoWouldWinMasters. And on YouTube, click the Visit Community button to leave your 1v1 battle challenges. Leave a comment and you might just hear it read on the show. Be a part of the arena, be a part of the debate. Now let's dive in. The sun sets on Barrow, Alaska, and it won't rise again for 30 days. They thought they were alone in the dark, but something else was waiting. Fangs flash, blood spills, the hunt begins. But this time, the vampires aren't alone. Something else waits in the shadows. A storm rolls in wrapped in leather and armed with silver. Something half-human, half-immortal has come. This week, it's the Daywalker himself, Blade, versus the creatures of endless night, the vampires of 30 Days of Night. 30 days just got a lot shorter. Welcome back to another Shocktober match of Who Would Win Masters. I am Sam Proof on all of the socials, and today we are dropping our usual format and dropping Blade into the unusual world of 30 Days of Night. Our guest today is the director and producer of the award-winning thriller Bystanders, and she is the editor-in-chief for the leading voice in the online horror community DreadCentral.com. It's Mary Beth McAndrews. Mary Beth, how are you doing today? Are you ready for this?
I'm so excited. I am a huge 30 Days of Night freak, and I know that this is a different one, but I'm very excited that you are breaking format for me because
me too.
This is like the first one that popped into my head, so I'm very excited.
I want to see how this goes. What exactly made you pick this? What made you pick 30 Days? You said you're a big fan. Is there anything that stands out from other vampire things in this property?
Yes. So if I really want to expose myself fully here, this was like my hyper fixation movie as a teenager. So this came out in 2009. I rented it from Blockbuster. So if Blockbuster was still around, like at the tail end of that, I rented it with my dad, watched it, became obsessed with it, watched it 4 more times that weekend, bought the graphic novel, read the graphic novel, wanted to it just made it my entire personality. And while I am not as obsessed with it now in my 30s, I still very much love this movie. Yes, I know it is imperfect, but I love it with all of my heart. And I think that this is my favorite vampire on screen due to, I will explain a lot, but how vicious and cruel they are, but also that kind of, yes, but we'll go too far. But yes, that's one of my favorite vampire media things. So, and I think it's slept on. So I feel as it is my duty to bring it up as much as I can when it makes sense.
Awesome. All right. Well, with that, it is time for our Tale of the Tape. This week's Tale of the Tape is brought to you by the American Candy Corn Initiative. When considering your trick-or-treat basket needs, anybody can buy candy that most kids love, but you're a wily trickster who's ahead of the curve. That's why your choice is candy corn. Look, man, anyone can buy a Snickers, Reese's Peanut Butter Cups, Milky Way Dark, Twix, 100 Grand, Twizzlers, Butterfingers, Three Musketeers, Sour Patch Kids, heck, even one of those small bags of chips. But you're not like most people. You remember that half the season is about tricks. So load up your basket with that mini brick of sugar, candy corn, and know that you've upheld the Halloween spirit by bringing down the joy of others one basket at a time. All right, tonight we have our third and final Shocktober match, and this is a setup that we've never tried before. Normally, the battle takes place on a neutral location, but tonight we are going to drop Blade directly into 30 Days of Night and see what happens. So first, we have Blade, the half-vampire monster hunter. Real name Eric Brooks. Blade was created by Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan and first appeared in The Tomb of Dracula number 10 back in 1973. Blade quickly became the star of Dracula comics and spun off into his own book. Blade has all of the strengths of vampires and none of their weaknesses. Hunting the undead is not just his job, It's his whole way of life. On the other side, we have 30 Days of Night. 30 Days of Night is a comic series that has spun off into a couple of movies and a couple of miniseries. The general plot revolves around a small Alaskan town that has an extended period of no sunlight. A horde of vampires led by the elder vampire Marlowe descend upon the town, infiltrating and weakening the defenses before attempting to devour all of the people therein. That's the basics. We will let the debaters fill in the rest. That means it's time to introduce your opponent for tonight. He's the man who never leaves his house during sunlight, not because he's a vampire, he just burns really, really easily. It is Ray Stakenas. Ray, how you doing? Did you bring some sunscreen, or I guess moon screen?
Sam, I'm doing great today, and I do wear sunscreen at night. Heck, I go out on my patio and I get a moon tan. That's what I like to do in my time off. I've been accused of being pale. I don't know. I can't see my own reflection.
Right.
Anyway, I am excited about this. Look, we talk about this as the first time we've really broken the format. We like to do these sort of genre-bending moves, and it's Shocktober. It's the finale of Shocktober. Why not do something we've never done before? Normally, these battles involve no prior knowledge and a neutral location, and we just want to get to the nuts and bolts of who would win in a fight. But what if, I ask the question, what if we dropped Blade into the scenario of 30 Days of Night? We are going to find out today. The people at home can judge, and they should probably. Yeah, go on our Patreon and judge. You're going to want your voice heard on this one. I have a feeling. It's going to be a lot to say. Anyway, Mary Beth, great to have you here. I am excited to do this. It's time.
Gosh, I'm ready. I think.
All right.
I think I'm ready.
And with that, it's time for the rules in 1 minute.
Here are your rules for Who Would Win Masters in 1 minute. Number 1, there will be 3 timed rounds with counterpoints allowed. Number 2, characters will have no prior knowledge of their opponent and no outside interference will be allowed. Number 3, keep the characters in character. Outliers and crossovers will be given less weight. Number 4, battles can be won by death, knockout, battlefield removal, or incapacitation. And number 5, after the battle, I will give my unofficial opinion as to who wins and why. However, I am just one voice. It will be up to all of you on our social media and our Patreon to make your voices heard as to who won.
All right, now those are our traditional rules. Do we need to make any sort of amends to that for this scenario?
Think so. I mean, I think
Okay.
in this particular scenario, let me lay it out, and Mary Beth, let's just see if you agree. I believe that we are in an Alaskan town on the first day of 30 Days of Night. I believe that Marlowe and all of his vampire cadre have infiltrated the town. They have killed the dogs, they've burned the phones, they've done all the things needed to wreck the infrastructure and ability to defend themselves.
The chaos has
at that
ensued.
point, and at that point, Blade is there. The only question I have is Blade the only one in the town, or is it still a normal Alaskan town plus Blade?
I mean, I think it would still be a normal Alaskan town plus Blade.
I think so too. So we're in agreement.
Just because no one's really going to be that helpful in the grand scheme on the human
I don't
side,
think they
I will
will.
say.
So we have
they're going to see
like
They're
a
Blade's
not
dozen or
really
so
helpful.
humans in the way is basically what we're saying. Okay.
Yeah, I see them causing more of a problem than a help. Let me say that.
Yes, I would agree with that. Very much so.
All right.
Fair. I think we got it.
Yep. Let's
Cool.
get into it. So with that being said, Mary Beth, you will start us off. 3 minutes on the clock for your 30 Days of Vampires, starting now.
Okay, so my first point about the vampires, Marlowe and his crew, is very aesthetic, and it has to just do with their teeth and their nails. These are not vampires with the little fangs that retract. They're not manicured, beautiful vampires like perhaps Blade is used to. These are much more vicious vampires. While they look very humanoid, they have those really long claws, and they also have shark's teeth almost in their mouths. That there's no retracting and looking human. These are very uncanny creatures. And so there's a viciousness to them, I think, and they feel more like predators. And while Blade is used to vampires and very vicious vampires, he's not used to these kinds of vampires. These ones that I think are a little bit more animal-like than what we see in the world of Blade. And while, maybe he is used to strong vampires, he is not maybe used to ones that are so easy. They can so easily injure him in ways that he wouldn't expect. And while he can't be turned, he's obviously a vampire. There's still their ability to broken arms, broken bones, strong punches are, united. But there's something about the viscerality of their attacks that I think would throw Blade for a loop. There's a lot more going on. Like, he's fighting both a human and an angry shark dog at the same time. And I find that's a very much more overwhelming vampire experience than perhaps we are used to seeing and he is used to seeing. And I think that even and especially if we're talking about not just Marlowe, but an entire crew of these vampires, which I will talk about later with a pack mentality, they are much easier to turn people. So if we want to bring in the human element of these other humans that could potentially be around helping, in scare quotes, Blade, they're so much easier to turn. You see in the movie, just a scratch can turn someone into a vampire. We're not just you have to bite them and they have to drink your blood. There isn't really a ritual here. It's a much easier situation to get turned into a vampire. So it's much easier for their numbers to increase, even if there is a very limited amount of people left over. So, and that's also ignoring this is not really, it's not really teeth and nails. But anyway, so
30 seconds remaining.
So in conclusion, I think that for my first point, just from a very aesthetic, practical, what they look like perspective, the tooth and nail aspect of these vampires is going to be very overwhelming from a physical attack perspective for Blade, even though he is part vampire and he has experience with them. They are so different from what he has ever seen and from what a lot of other media has seen with vampires. And there's, I think, an element there that is much more vicious and much more...
All right, strong start. Ray, 3 minutes on the clock for Blade, starting now.
Now, first thing I want to say right here is you made a really good point about the other people being turned into vampires very, very easily. Now, remember, in the situation of 30 Days of Night, they kind of have an expressed order to not turn people and to take their heads off and kill them whenever they can. So maybe if their numbers start to dwindle, I don't know. I think if their numbers start to dwindle to the point where they think these townsfolk are their only hope, I think they're more likely to turn tail and run like they did at the end of the movie than they are to all of a sudden double their numbers with a bunch of people they don't know if they can trust. Just saying. Now, talking about Blade, he is a daywalker or a dhampir. So I love the point about the bites and the claws and the fangs and the feral nature of them. I think that is very interesting because you're right. Blade, a lot of the time, is fighting Dracula and other vampires who have a more regal persona about them. And these guys will just jump right on you 3 at a time and try to drag you down and bite you down. But Blade being a dhampir means those scratches and bites are probably not going to they're going to annoy him, but I don't think they're going to be enough to put him down at any point. The one cool thing here, because the vampire bites don't affect him, you said it yourself. He knows what vampires are, though. And he knows exactly how to kill them. So this is the one case where it's not really prior knowledge. It's who he is and the situation that he is in that says he knows. He's going to know right away these guys are vampires. We'll talk about that a little bit later and why he'll know. But he'll know right away what's going on. Plus, they don't exactly try to hide it. They got blood all over their face. They're rubbing it on the top of their heads. They got giant fangs sticking out. Blade is very knowledgeable about deep vampire lore. There's a lot of different types of vampires, not even taking the Vampire the Masquerade aesthetic into things, but there's just a bunch of different types of vampires out there, from the more feral to the more noble. And I think Blade knows a little bit about all of them right there. Look, we know he loves to fight them. We've seen him drop into a horde of vampires in the city, and a guy's like, hey, you need some help down there? He's like, nope. And he just drops into a dozen vampires and just starts killing them. And by the way, he got through that pretty well. He's also defeated Dracula on a number of occasions. And in my mind, if you defeat Dracula and his minions, Marlowe's great, but Dracula is a cut above all other vampires. And in fact, in video games, Blade has actually killed Dracula. I know that's not the exact version we're talking about, but it's worth mentioning. He loves to use environmental weapons to kill his vampires in case somehow his swords get taken away from him. I've just seen him pick up just whatever's handy and stab them, stake them, whatever. He once threw a dagger and knocked a vampire's teeth out, which is hilarious. He's also very, very good at stealth. He can sneak up on the undead and take them out. But he's also not just fought vampires, he's fought werewolves as well. So the feral nature of the combat coming at him, I think, is going to be counteracted by the fact that he's also fought these other more feral creatures. At the end of the day, in this scenario, I have to ask, who in fact is the hunter and who is the huntee?
All right, strong start for both of our point ones. Mary Beth, you have a 1 minute counterpoint. 60 seconds on the clock, starting now.
Yeah, Blade has defeated Dracula, but in the world of 30 Days of Night, Marlowe is a higher up figure, almost like Dracula. So I think that perhaps, don't doubt Marlowe's power in terms of where he is in the vampire hierarchy. I know that is maybe going a little bit outside of where we are, but I will say within the canon of all of this. And yes, obviously he can be defeated by man, but I still think that there is a power to him that Blade has not seen before, due to the combined nature of being both human and monstrous in the same breath. So that will be my counterpoint for now. But that's my counterpoint.
All right, cool. I'm excited to see where this goes in the next 2 points, but we'll find that out when we come back from this break.
Have you ever searched yourself online? The results can be surprising, sometimes unsettling, let me tell you. Your phone number, home address, and even details about your family are out there, whether you agreed to it or not. That's because data brokers are collecting and selling your information to marketing scammers, basically anyone who's willing to pay. It's the reason these robocallers know your name and why ads seem to track you across every screen. It is a digital nightmare. Well, Aura could be your solution. You cannot conceive of how many different scummy data organizations there are out there. When I used this service, I was shocked at finding out there are hundreds of places my info could be found. Hundreds! And Aura can shut a lot of that down. And if your identity's ever stolen, you're backed up by $5 million in insurance and 24/7 US-based fraud support to help you recover quickly. Look, other services charge about the same, but they only cover 1-2 areas maybe. With Aura, you get it all. Data broker removal, credit and identity monitoring, device protection, fraud support. It's all in one simple app. Aura removes what's already exposed, protects what's not, and puts you back in control. Right now, you can try Aura free for 14 days when you visit aura.com/remove. That's enough time for Aura to start removing your personal information from these data broker sites. Sign up today at aura.com/remove and get the peace of mind that your privacy, identity, and finances are safeguarded. That's aura.com/remove. Certain terms apply. See the site for details.
All right, welcome back. It is time to bite into point number 2. Mary Beth, you are first with 3 minutes on the clock, starting now.
Okay, so Ray, you brought up the point that Blade can jump into a bunch of vampires and fight them, and also he's fought werewolves, and that's great. But I think something that is really important to these vampires is their pack mentality. And I say pack mentality because in the movie, we see them all moving like a pack of wolves. Marlowe is basically like the alpha, and these vampires move around him and they communicate with their screeching. There's even a point in the movie where you see Marlowe put his fingernail on a record. And while it is not super obvious in the movie, according to the director's commentary, it is his way to project out to summon all the other vampires and tell them to go, go, go. And so there is this communication that these vampires have that is so animalistic that comes to this pack mentality that while Blade has fought groups of vampires and werewolves, there's something about the coordination of these vampires that's so different. I think the vampires that he has fought in the past, they're all motivated by their own individual needs. They're all moving on their own as individuals. And in this, with the 30 Days of Night Vampire and with Marlowe, there is a more united mentality and communication that I think is much more terrifying and much harder to fight back against, especially as one person. And while Blade, again, like you said, is a Dampier, he is obviously part vampire. He is able to fight them more easily. He has that stealth. There is that, again, I'm not as familiar with the comics of Blade, no, knowing the movies. He is so used to a certain kind of vampire and not ones that hunt so systematically and have such a coordinated cruelty about them. I mean, just look at the part where they are using a human being as bait. And while Blade obviously is he's a hunter, he is a killer, I could potentially see him falling for something like that, not as a bad thing, but appealing to that human side of him. There is a human side that I think this mentality that these vampires have really is so different. And like you said, Ray, like 3 of them can jump on you and drag you down, and maybe he can fight those guys off. But when they're attacking you and also strategizing about how to attack you next and seems like an unrelenting waves of vampires, I think there is something much more terrifying.
30 seconds remaining.
And much more visceral to that kind of experience for Blade than dealing with more egotistical, more like solo motivated vampires that we've seen him interact with, and outside of Blade 2, which is another discussion. But yes, I think the pack mentality of Marlowe and the vampires of Friday Days of Night make them a much more terrifying opponent for Blade than perhaps anything that he has fought in the past. Once again, kind of taking the tooth and nail point I was making and expounding upon that even more. There's that weird uncanniness to them.
All right, it's time for Blade's point number 2. Ray, you are up with 3 minutes on the clock, starting now.
Well, I want to talk about some of the physicals of Blade, because we do know that the vampires in 30 Days of Night, they're very fast, they're very agile, and they're very, very strong as well. Though they're not quite as strong as I think, other than Marlowe, who is. The irregular ones I don't think are quite as strong as maybe I wished they were. But the first things first, the vampires are using wild and important and smart techniques. They cut all the power to the town, building by generator, because they want to fight in the dark. Well, they're going to try to do that against Blade. The problem is Blade can see in the dark, and this is not going to affect him one iota. It's definitely not going to scare him or put him on the back foot in any way. My man has to wear sunglasses in the middle of night because he sees too well in the dark, all right? But he's also much stronger, faster, and more durable than anything that the 30 Days of Night vampires have ever dealt with before. They are essentially they're weak. They're weak, and what I mean by that is just they hunt weak prey, right? They're not trying to have a good fight. They're not trying to bring down the hardest target. They chose the 30 Days of Night scenario because they thought it would be easy, right? And so this is the thing. They only wanted 150 people in the town, or 152 according to the sign, or maybe I got that number wrong. The point is, though, they knew they were weakened. They knew they could come in, and they knew they could scatter them and beat them. But Blade is too strong for that. This is a guy who can cut through Spider-Man's webs. He's lifted vampires up above his head and just chucked them. He ripped off a vampire's head with his bare hands once. He can also regenerate. They're going to have to do so much damage to Blade to actually keep him down. I'm not sure they're going to be able to do it without him getting good hits off and taking them out. This is a guy who can get slashed open by really grievous wounds, but be popped up back fighting a moment later. I love the slashes and the bites and all that good stuff. I just don't know if any of that's going to be enough to actually put him down. This is a guy who got hit real hard by an enhanced Mjolnir, Thor's hammer, and got pinned underneath it on the ground. Luckily, Lady Jane Foster pulled it back, at which point he grabbed it, flew back and hit her while he was flying back with Mjolnir. So he was able to keep fighting. He can endure pain and push through it. It's sort of who he is. And he's also just as fast, if not faster, than the vampires that we see in the movie, right? He can keep up with all the fastest undead creatures in Marvel, such as Morbius. It's Morbin time. Put in your Morbius memes here. That's fine. He exists in this world. but he's also dodged bullets. He can just use his sword and hit bullets away as they're flying at him. This is a guy who bum rushed a vampire, and he was able to tear it to shreds before that vampire could even react. So against regular scrubby people, townspeople in Alaska who don't want to be there, 30 Days of Night vampires will own it. Against a creature like Blade, I think they're going to start having some second thoughts.
All right, Mary Beth, you have 1 minute for your second counterpoint, starting now.
So you make a great point about, he's beaten a million vampires, blah, blah, blah. This is what he does. Totally understandable. However, it doesn't take into account that Marlowe has been around for centuries, that this entire race has been around for centuries. And while we can't speculate about what kind of struggles or what kind of creatures they've fought in the past, we can only really operate with the text. I think that you're not giving them enough credit about what they can strategize against. Yes, they've picked a weak target with these humans, but it's because they've seen what it's like to survive and trying to live in this world. And why is it just easier to pick the weak ones, And when they get an opponent, like, we see Josh Hartnett's character and that opponent. Yes, Marlowe gets beaten in that film, but there's something, there's more strategizing, I think, happening here than you give them credit for in terms of what they can do against another vampire opponent, especially like Blade, especially a creature like Blade, who, while is very powerful, does rely a lot on different kinds of tools and technologies that in a place like Barrow, Alaska, where they've cut off comms, electricity, everything, he wouldn't have access to all of his tools. Not to say that Blade is only his tools, but...
From 30 days to 30 seconds, we'll be right back. Well, those commercials didn't suck. Huh? No? All right, whatever. All right, let's get into our third and final point. Mary Beth, you're going to take us into the third point with 3 minutes on the clock, starting now.
So I've talked a lot about the pack mentality, the cruelty of these vampires, but I think the biggest thing that makes them such a formidable opponent against a vampire like Blade is their motivation above all else is their relentless hunger. I think we see a lot of vampires that Blade is fighting are, again, very human. A lot of their motivations are grounded in trying to find a secret or trying to rule the world. There's a kind of an ego element to a lot of the opponents that Blade has. Again, I'm basing this off of films. This is my limited experience with Blade as merely an incredible cinematic figure. But the thing with these vampires, while they want to inspire fear in humanity, they are much crueler and much less emo than a lot of vampires you're used to because they are purely governed by their endless hunger and desire to consume. And I think that, Blade sees vampires as just these mindless bloodsuckers, but we see them in a lot of media as they have other desires. They're, Stephen Dorff's character in Blade is, he has a lot of other things he's trying to accomplish on top of, drinking blood and being sexy. But these vampires in 30 Days of Night are purely governed by a need to feed and a need to strike fear in hearts and a need for cruelty. And I think that there is an inhuman element that is so different to what Blade has experienced in the past. And yes, while physically he could be able to rip these creatures apart, I think there is something about their motivations that is a bit shocking, especially to a hero like Blade who may think, oh, there's other motivations. There's something here to not just fight. We're fighting back against something. And here it's a little bit more nihilistic. And while there's a deeper kind of nihilism to what these vampires are and what they are trying to accomplish in the world. And, Blade is often trying to fight back against a bigger vampire like kind of cabal. And there is a hint at that in the graphic novels of 30 Days of Night. And there is a kind of a bigger group of vampires trying to not take over the world necessarily, but there is something about their motivations that are so much more nihilistic, I think, than what we have seen previously in other vampire media, perhaps. And I feel like that relentless hunger, that motivation is something that, while not, a physical ability, I think that is something that drives them in a way that Blade has never seen with perhaps other
30 seconds remaining.
So again, at the end of the day, it comes back again to this really interesting melding of animal and human with these vampires in a way that I think is so unique from other vampires that we have seen in any other media. And yeah, that's, I'm not saying they're completely unique, but there is something about their hunger, their animalistic nature, but it's also paired with that human nature that is so different from what I like Blade has experienced before. And I think there's something about that makes them a formidable opponent, even in the face of Blade, the singular vampire hunter.
All right, well done. Ray, you have 3 minutes for your third and final point, starting now.
Yeah, I think that's a real interesting point. I mean, I actually think the hunger to a degree works against the vampires, because if the townspeople are all around, they're going to want to go eat the townspeople. And I think if you take your eyes off of Blade and you start like jumping on somebody and eating them, you're basically opening up your back to Blade's katana and giving him an opportunity to mess you up with no real fighting back. So I think if they get a little bit too hungry, that works against them. But let's talk about some of Blade's other powers, his training, and his equipment, because he's a guy who uses knives and katanas, guns as well from time to time. But he's really, believe it or not, somebody who uses bladed weapons does Blade. Weird, I know. And I believe that he strikes with his super strength I've already laid out. He's the kind of guy who can cut a vampire in half pretty easily if he needs to. But he also uses remotely detonated bombs a reasonable amount of time too. So the idea of if all the vampires are kind of standing around like they do in the movie, if he's hiding in his shadow, throws a bomb out, he could torch a whole bunch of them in one go, just like that, and then jump in and start stabbing and cutting the ones that are left. He also, and this is, I think, very important in this battle, Blade has the ability to sense supernatural creatures around him. Not just vampires, but yes, vampires. He has enhanced senses. He can actually smell the undead around him. He was able to smell out a mall Santa and know it was a demon from the sense of smell in a mall. I think all mall Santas very possibly are demons, but that's a separate argument for a different show. Anyway, he can also sense when vampires are not in his presence as well. So it's going to be very hard for these feral creatures to get the jump on him. And I think in order to win, they need that, right? But another thing that I thought was important is he's a martial artist. He knows how to fight, whereas the feral creatures not. And if you have somebody who's not a trained fighter versus somebody who is a trained fighter, especially in a one-on-one environment, well, the guy who knows karate, hapkido, kung fu, capoeira, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, boxing, eskrima, and ninjutsu probably has the advantage against the feral creature when they are fighting, right? And he also uses things like shuriken, the ninja stars, and that allows him to essentially be very, very good offensively, defensively, whatever he needs. Now, one thing that Blade has said before, he claims to know 26 different ways to kill someone before they even are able to feel it. Before they're even able to feel it, that's very, very fast. He knows the points to hit. He knows the ways to hit them. I think this movie should happen, quite honestly. I want to see it. But the last thing I'll say is, remember, Josh Hartnett did kill Marlowe in the movie by turning himself into a vampire, and he was also a trained fighter. And killing Marlowe seemed to make all the other vampires skip town. If Blade can cut off the head of the snake, potentially that opens up an opportunity where they will leave on their own.
All right, Mary Beth, you have 1 minute to make your third and final counterpoint. 60 seconds on the clock, starting now.
So I did mention before, I do think that the vampires would get to Blade by tricking him a little bit, using his bait. I do think the bait thing would work against Blade. He is still a human, and I think there are still human aspects there. I also do think the cold would have an effect on Blade. I'm not saying it would make him a frozen, like a human, but I do think it dampens their senses, and that's discussed a little bit here. So I do think the cold would have an effect on that. And the vampires in this movie, while Marlowe is killed by Josh Hartnett, there really isn't much else that hurts them. Light, besides the UV light, and yeah, sure, lots of other things hurt them, but we don't really see them dying unless they're getting hit by a UV light. Yes, Blade has weapons, but I think you're giving them a little bit, not giving as much credit for as powerful and regenerative as they might be against something like Blade.
All right, and finally, as you have had 3 counterpoints, Ray has had none. He gets the final word. Ray, at your leisure, start away.
Yeah, I love this battle, and I want to thank you first and foremost, Mary Beth, not just for coming on the show, but I've never seen this movie, and I've kind of wanted to for a while, so I watched it just a few days ago for the very first time to prepare for this battle, and I enjoyed the heck out of it. I don't understand why critics wouldn't like it. It's a different take on vampires. It's a clever take on vampires, and it's one that would ultimately lose to Blade had he been in that scenario. Now, you say I'm not giving them enough credit. I think you might be giving them a little bit too much credit. We've seen them like get run over with like a snowplow and get shredded and knifed and like beheaded. Remember when that little baby, not the baby, but like the small child in the convenience store?
Yeah, she gets beheaded, yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm just saying, like, we've established that cutting them up and beheading them is a way to drop them. Guess what Blade's favorite way to kill vampires is? And that's chopping them up and beheading them with multiple bladed instruments, including a katana, which he got ninjutsu training, so he's kind of good with a sword, and he's very, very fast. I think ultimately this is a fascinating battle. I do think that Blade wins this battle in the end, but I do think he takes a lot of hits along the way, and he struggles to get this win. I think that Blade wins this probably about 7, 8 times out of 10, but I don't think any single one of those does he do in a walk. Maybe 1 out of the 10, he picks off Marlowe right away, and then the other ones just sort of back up, like that Homer Simpson meme into the bush. I think that's sort of what I'm seeing them do there. That being said, phenomenal battle, phenomenally done by you. I await Sam's decision. I'm excited to see what the people have to say about this one. I want some fan art. That's basically what I'm saying.
All right, gang, it is time for me to sink my teeth into this battle, and I will be right back with my decision.
Made 2 figures met in collision. Now let's find out who would win. It's time to hear Sam's decision.
All right, I want to start off by saying that both debaters did fight tooth and nail to make some amazing points, from the shark dog vampires who might be so vicious they're making Blade say, "I'm going to be in a bigger tote," for his weapons, to the decades of martial arts and weapons training experience that Blade has. To me, there is a big chance that this battle is in fact won by a town full of vampires incapacitating Blade. But as Ray pointed out, the vampires' standing order is to kill their food instead of turning it. This does weigh in favor of the Daywalker. Blade, he's half human, and that half human side may very well fall for some human bait. If he's caught off guard, maybe he loses the first night. But by the second night, Marlowe and his crew aren't ready for anyone who hunts back. I'm giving this battle to the vampire, Blade. But that's just my opinion. You out there, Mary Beth is very, very rocked. I can see it. Please go to our social media, our Patreon, and make your voices heard. All right, Mary Beth, I'm sorry this didn't go well for Marlowe in my eyes. We'll see what the community says. Is there anything else you want to add to this?
They put in it. They really tried their best. They tried their hardest, and that's okay. And you know what? Even when Marlowe gets his head punched through, it's okay. They tried. They tried their best.
Fine. Dude, yeah.
Here's what happens.
Cool.
Blade just becomes their leader, and they all just come together and integrate. I think that's what's going to happen. And it's actually just going to be they all just become one big happy family, right?
Nice. They make a big Coke commercial. There's flowers and fangs. Yeah, it's great. I get it. Thank you so much.
Do they give a Coke can to like a Coke bottle to a vampire polar bear up there?
Yes. Oh, my God.
All of the polar bears get turned. I love it. They're all pink now. They have the big fangs, which they already have fangs, but they're bigger. This is the fan art I want to see.
Please. I'll get it tattooed on my body if you do it.
Oh my God.
I'm not joking.
You heard
I'm
that
not joking. I want a 30 Days of Night tattoo. I already have a sleeve. If someone draws like really good 30 Days of Night Blade crossover fan art, I will get it tattooed on my body.
All right. Nice. That's the Who Would Win Masters guarantee.
I'm not joking.
Right on. Thank you so much for joining us. This was so much fun. I'm so glad that you could come in to represent Dread Central, and this was such a cool concept.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for humoring the concept and like playing along with it. This was a blast.
I love it. I'm so glad to break from our usual, and I hope we can do some more things inspired by this in the near future. Ray, did you have questions? I think. Do you want to take this?
I do have things I want to say. That is one of the weakest setups. That's me playing volleyball, barely getting it to my teammate. Sam, come on, you're a pro. The point I'm trying to make.
I thought you were going to interrupt me at any point. You want me to do more?
I was waiting for you to dish it off. You have very important things to say, and all of this is staying in the show. The point I'm trying to make here is I love this battle. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I do think Blade wins. I didn't like the way in the movie that Josh Hartnett just punched through the face of Marlowe. I didn't dwell on it too much in the battle, but it was a weak way for a very strong character to go out. That's like if like Darth Vader at the end of Return of the Jedi or whatever, if Luke just sucker punched him right in the nose and he just dropped. It's just, I don't know. I didn't like that ending very much. I thought it could have been a little bit more epic in the moment or something, right?
Or Boba Fett just drops into a worm's pit, sure,
Yeah, but, he gets out in the fan fiction. The point is, I am doing a special thing. Now, first off, I'm relieved after this battle, Sam. We'll see what the people say. But I thought I was going to lose Shocktober 2-1. I came into this 1-1, and I'm very happy to say I barely pulled it out this year. I don't always win Shocktobers, but I think I might have this year. We'll see. The point through all of this is I am doing my own movie challenge this year, Mary Beth, and I wanted to ask you about this real quick before we get out of here. Last year, I watched 12 horror movies. This year, I want to up it to 13. So far, I've watched Critters, 30 Days of Night, as well as The Strangers Chapter 2 in theaters. If you like giant pigs, that's a movie for you, but probably no one else. Probably no else. Now, I'm trying to watch movies either I haven't seen in a long time or that I've never seen before. I want to broaden my horizons, and I have someone from Dread Central right here talking to me. Are there any suggestions of horror movies that you think I or the people at home might be interested in that are a little off the radar?
Yes. So I've been scrolling through my letterbox because it's like, my job is watching a lot of these weird, obscure horror movies, and I love them all so much. And I'm a huge found footage person, so I'm always going to recommend found footage first for everyone. So a really good one that I think is off the radar is called Butterfly Kisses. It's quite scary. It's urban legend found footage, and I highly recommend checking that one out, especially Lake Mungo. That one's a little bit more known, but that one is that's a sadder one than scary, but one of my personal favorites side of found footage films that I think people should check out this year. I'm trying to think. There are so many good things that have come out that are coming out, and I think I'm trying to think of a good one that's like kind of goofy. I kind of unfortunately default to more serious extreme horror, and that is not everyone's cup of tea. I am very aware of that, but I would recommend everyone seeing Good Boy. That is in theaters now. It is the movie where it is about a dog from his perspective, and it is a horror movie, and it is very good, and it is very creepy. The new VHS movie is out now. That's actually quite good. I mean, I'm again found footage. I love it, but I highly recommend the new one. If you're looking for bleak and want something bleak and makes you feel bad, you should check out The Coffee Table. It's a Spanish movie that really will make you feel terrible, especially if kids stuff makes you upset.
God.
So don't watch if you're a parent and you get upset by kids stuff. Just don't watch it. I don't think you would have a good time with it. And then to end on a perhaps more fun, happier note, what's a good one that's like, if you want a really good alien invasion, No One Will Save You on Hulu. Came out a couple years ago, no dialogue, and it's alien invasion, and it's hard to do good alien invasion, and that's a good alien invasion.
I love it. Yeah, and of those, awesome. I've seen The Coffee Table. Funny thing, when we wrapped up, I was going to ask you what your opinion was on it. I think it's the darkest comedy of all time.
Agreed. Highly agree. I watched it on an airplane by accident because I had a screener. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know what it was about because it was before. It was during a festival run, so I had no idea. And I was going
Go
to my
in with
nephew's first
nothing.
birthday, so
Don't look
yeah,
it
that
up.
was
Just
great.
watch it or don't.
Yeah.
That's also an
Yeah.
option. All
Yeah.
right. Well, thank you very, very much for coming on. Sam, get us up out of
Yeah.
here.
Real quick, Mary Beth, do you want to put any socials out there? I know people can find you on dreadcentral.com. Do you have any of your own you want to throw into the wind?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at mb.mcandrews. You can find me on Blue Sky and TikTok at mbmcandrews. Just yelling about movies on the internet all the time.
Awesome. And thank you again for joining us. And thank you everyone for listening, and absolutely go make your voices heard on our social media and our Patreon. You can keep the debate going with Who Would Win Show on Facebook and Threads, as well as on patreon.com/Who Would Win Show. Tune in next week when Ray and I go over your votes, your comments, and wrap up this battle. If you think you've got what it takes to sit in the challenger's chair, record a 1-minute video demo of yourself and send it to whowouldwinshow@gmail.com. For Who Would Win Masters, this is Sam Proof. Stay strong.